Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it is 12 o'clock and we will get started. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today's webinar. And my name is Agnes Adikai, and I am the director of the Circle of Indigenous Empowerment, which is our Native Center for Disabilities here at the Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities, part of the College of Medicine. And today's webinar is going to be an overview of traumatic brain injury in Indigenous communities. And so just some information here. So I will start my slides and then I will cover some housekeeping, and then we will go into the presentation, and then we will have some time afterwards for question and answers. Okay. Let me start by, oops, sharing my screen. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Okay. Okay, folks. So here is the first slide, which has the title, An Overview of Traumatic Brain Injury in Indigenous Communities, with our logo of the Circle of Indigenous Empowerment. And then my name, which is Agnes Adikai. As I said before, I introduced myself, and I'm the director of the Circle of Indigenous Empowerment. So we do have learning and development credit for those who are part of the University of Arizona. You're able to receive one learning and development credit for the session. And what you would need to do is use your phone to scan the QR code or to click on the link for the Qualtrics. And the form is only active during this time. So it will also be placed in the chat as well. So
Agnes,
yes.
the slides that's showing right now, it's the one that has your notes.
Ooh, never mind. Well, let me swap. Is that better?
There.
Okay.
Perfect.
So on my end, it swaps and it looks different. So thank you for clarifying that for me. Appreciate that. So today's session is also being recorded, and all recordings and materials will be available via email after our event. And if you'd like to ask a question, please type in your question in the chat, but also at the end of our presentation, we'll have some time and you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask your question. So if you encounter any technical difficulties, please send a message to the Sonoran Center in the chat, and they'll help you with whatever challenges that you have. We also have live captioning available, and we're grateful to Ariana, who will be our captioner today. So you can click on the live caption button down below. And we also have live American Sign Language, ASL, today. And thank you, Jen, for providing us ASL service. And you can pin the interpreter by clicking the top right corner of their box. And again, please make sure when you're asking questions to not be speaking too quickly so that the captioner and interpreter can accurately capture what's being said. And that's also a note for me, as I have a tendency to speak really fast, especially when I get excited. So I'll have to remind myself to be able to speak slowly. and make sure that people understand what I say and to give our folks time to be able to translate the information. In addition, the University of Arizona is also located on tribal lands of the Tohono people and the Yoemi, also called Yaqui. And so Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes. And we hope to be able to continue being inclusive partners with our sovereign nations and our Indigenous communities, and hopefully be able to provide continued services through education offerings, partnerships, and working out in the community. So, just a little bit about myself before we start our presentation is that I have been with our Circle of Indigenous Empowerment now for about a year and a half. I come from the College of Medicine and College of Public Health, previously working with recruiting students, particularly Native students, into public health, but also working with tribal communities on a variety of health disparities, health equity issues. And so traumatic brain injury was a topic that has always been brought up in our conversations regarding public health in terms of working with infants and children, those in school, those who are young adults, elder. So it is a challenging issue that um, impacts everybody from birth to elder status. And so for our today's session, some of our learning objectives, as we see on the screen here, with an image of a black and white image of a brain, is that we will review the causes of traumatic brain injury among Indigenous peoples. And I will focus mostly on American Indians here in the United States. We'll look at the cognitive and physical challenges of individuals with traumatic brain injury. And then we'll also look at the importance of improving care coordination among interprofessional teams to improve outcomes for patients with traumatic brain injuries. Okay. So, so what is a brain injury? It's always really important to define what a brain injury is. So in this case, a traumatic brain injury, also called TBI, is where an external force to the head causes altered consciousness. Um, it's an injury to the brain, which results in deteriorating the cognitive, which is the thinking abilities, the physical makeup of the brain, and which can again impact the way that we have expressed emotions and also impacts the way that we're able to function every day. So some of the causes of brain injury include trauma, anoxia or hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen. This can be due to cardiac arrest, which is heart attacks or drug overdose, or respiratory failure. That can be because of drowning. It can also be because of infection. There are infections that impact the brain. There are tumors that are in the brain. Some of them are cancerous, some of them are not, that can cause brain injuries. And of course, we have degenerative neurological diseases, um, such as Alzheimer's and dementia, that can cause brain injury. And of course, strokes, which are when blood vessels within our brain break and cause excessive bleeding, starves the brain, but also can cause swelling of the brain. Okay, so some of those are some of the causes. And when working in medicine and in working with folks in a healthcare team, they will also use various terms when talking about brain injury. So when you have a client or a person you're working with, or a person a family member or a friend or who has a brain injury, many times folks will use the terms such as acquired brain injury. So that's usually a brain injury that that occurs after a period of normal development, meaning that you have no other injuries or challenges, and those
We
can be
can't hear
internal.
you.
I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Can
Yeah.
be internal causes such as infections, tumors and strokes, like I mentioned, which is where things can happen inside the brain that can cause a brain injury, or external, which can be those car crashes, those falls, and sports injuries. Now, doctors can also use another term called congenital and perinatal brain injury. Congenital meaning a condition with a child born um, that a child's born with a condition. It can be metabolic or chromosomal, or perinatal, meaning a condition developing around the time of birth. And so it can be a condition where maybe the cord is wrapped around a child when a child's being birthed, and a lack of oxygen um, causes that infant to have a brain injury. Now, there's also the term traumatic brain injury, which is when a person just has a normal brain development. And there are two terms that are used. One is head open head injury, which is where the skull, the meninges, and brain are penetrated by an external object, say, for instance, being shot in the head or being impaled in the head, or something that goes in the head, usually cause of an accident or maybe intentional. Another term is the closed head injury, where the skull and meninges are not penetrated, but the brain hits maybe a dashboard in a car crash. The person falls and hits their head. Another is maybe shaken baby syndrome, where a person vigorously shakes a young child and the child's head um, um, goes back and forth. And sports injuries. And as I mentioned before, it can be where there's a lack of oxygen, usually through drowning or through strangulation, which happens a lot, unfortunately, in domestic violence cases. Smoke inhalation that can happen when the person is within a burning house or a car. And of course, the non-penetrating blows. So there are different ways that people can sustain a brain injury. And for a lot of physicians, they usually have to use certain terms in their medical reports. And also, these terms are also useful when there is an investigation to figure out why something would happen to where a person does get a brain injury. And this is particularly important for car crashes and for domestic violence cases. Okay, so this is an image of a brain here. So we have a black and white image of a brain. And in particular, we're going to focus a little bit about closed head brain injuries. And again, this is where the brain is not penetrated by anything, but the damage happens within the brain. So what happens, again, this is for car crashes. When this person is a car crash and the force of the car into your car whips your head back and forth. So your brain goes back and forth within this enclosed space. Same thing with the shaken baby syndrome, where a person shakes a child very violently. The head goes back and forth, and the brain goes back and forth in this enclosed space. So this is what they would call a coup injury or a contra coup. So basically, it causes direct damage to the brain tissue. So when the person moves forward like this, the brain hits the skull right here. And then when the head goes back, the brain hits the back of the skull. So again, you're doing brain injury in the front and in the back. And we know that our brain has so many capabilities. It's the master organ that really controls our breathing, our thinking, the way we move, the way we talk, our emotions. And so such an injury can cause a lot of challenges to us. And so when we have a closed head brain injury, so we have the direct brain injury to the tissue itself, which can heal, but also it can cause damage to the nerves, to all the little intricacies of your brain, to where you actually have a physiological response that can cause those side effects and challenges later in life. And so we will cover that in the next couple of slides. Okay. So unfortunately, brain injury is common. So when I'm talking about brain injury, I'm talking about everything, including traumatic brain injury, um, open and closed, perinatal and congenital. So about 2.5 million traumatic brain injuries occur in the US, and most are usually mild, meaning that a lot of people may be involved in falls or sports accidents, and they get up and think they feel fine, and so don't seek medical attention. And so a lot of researchers feel that there's an undercounting of the amount of people who have brain injuries because they don't seek help. So how often have we had our child fall down and we tell them, just get up, dust the dirt off, you're fine. We have maybe a young adult who plays sports, is hit in the head by a ball or falls, and usually they'll get right up and say, I'm fine, I'm going to continue playing. This happens also most likely in football and in basketball. And many times people don't seek medical attention. But there are those who do go to the emergency department. Most of them are seen in the emergency department, and many times about 11% are hospitalized because doctors deem that it's important for them to be, again, looked at a little closer because the person may think that they're fine, but others around them who have seen them in this accident or crash or incident will say, no, you are not fine. You're not walking, you're not talking, you don't remember things. So we're going to take you to the hospital. And usually it's the other person, people around who say that the person is not fine. And usually every year, about 3% of people actually 3% of people die from causes of traumatic brain injuries, and about 6% live with long-term disability. Again, the disability is because of the traumatic brain injury, but then the after effects of what happens of having your brain being impacted. Okay, and many times for those who think they've had mild traumatic brain injuries, may recover and then have some challenges and issues that they don't know why they're struggling with certain things, and it may be directly tied to that brain injury. So it's important to really continue follow-up, even though if you've had what you might think of as mild. Okay, so this is a diagram infographic from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, a governmental agency that looks at prevention and tracks data. And they have a traumatic brain injury website, and this is their image that looks at the leading causes of traumatic brain injury in the United States from 2002 to 2006. So we see here 35% of traumatic brain injury is caused by falls. The next highest is traffic accidents at 17%. About 16.5% is struck by or against something. Again, something does intentionally to this person. Many times it's in a violent act, either domestic or or it may be through an attack. There are unknown causes. There are assaults when someone is intentionally hurt, and 9% is other, meaning there's not enough information for them to really figure out what that is, or there's just so many, there's small numbers. So that is put into the other category. And I know this is a busy slide, so I'm not going to read everything. Again, these slides will be available for you afterwards. But in the United States, traumatic brain injury is a leading cause of death and disability in the nation. So about 30 to 50% of all injury-related fatalities and disability, adjusted for life years loss. So about 1.7 million suffer from traumatic brain injuries. Again, some do die from traumatic brain injuries. And again, a lot of our traumatic brain injury related deaths are due to intentional injuries. And that's the assaults. That is the domestic violence cases. That are folks who commit suicide or die by suicide or die by the hands of another, which is homicide. And usually those are through firearms or other weapons. And then others, deaths are due to unintentional falls, meaning that there was no purpose and a fall had happened, and motor vehicle crashes. So those who have the highest incidence, meaning those new cases coming in, are those aged up to 17 years, meaning the folks within that category of young adults up to 17 years, and those over 75 years old. And so we know that children sometimes are, and young adults are at high risk for traumatic brain injury due to sports, due to maybe car crashes. And for older adults, those over 75, it's usually falls. Okay. Now, it's also very important for American Indians in the United States. And here in the United States, American Indians have higher rates of traumatic brain injuries, those between the ages of 18 years old to 34, compared to the US population. And researchers in looking at this say that it may be due to substance use disorder and motor vehicle crashes. So that's different than the previous slide where we looked at the US population where the rates were higher among young children and older adults. So a lot of our younger people from 18 to 34 have higher rates of traumatic brain injury. So and the reasons were because of motor vehicle related deaths. So for American Indians and Alaska Natives, this is data that's reported from the Indian Health Service in their trends in Indian health. American Indian Alaska Native people have a 200% greater risk of being involved in a motor vehicle accident and actually dying from that. And that is a huge number. That could be due to the fact that we live, most of our folks live in urban areas, but a lot of our folks still live, about 40% live in rural areas. And a lot of our folks also go back and forth between urban and rural communities for work, for employment, meeting people for ceremonies. So we are at greater risk because we tend to use the roads more often. And also our vehicles may not be kept up to safety standards because we're not able to afford cars. It could be the conditions of the roads in our rural areas, because many times our rural roads are not maintained well. How often have you seen a lot of potholes, sinkholes, no guardrails? There's also a lot of wildlife and animals, horses in particular, livestock that cross roads. There's also no lighting and poor visibility, and of course, natural weather such as snowstorms, dust storms, and so forth. that increase our risk of being part of motor vehicle crashes. In addition to the fact that we also have some high rates of substance abuse, usually drinking or drugs in various communities, but that doesn't mean everybody has those high rates. Certain communities may have it, or it may be just documented more often. So again, we are at high risk for hospitalizations and deaths due to motor vehicle crashes. And so when a person is involved in a motor vehicle crash, you're more likely to have a traumatic brain injury, because when you have the seatbelt going across you, your body is secured in place, but your head is not. And so when you are in a crash, again, you have that forward and backward head move that causes the damage to the front and the back of the head. Okay. So another category that is important to think about are students with traumatic brain injuries. A lot of the data we see focus on young children and older adults, or those in the middle category, but many times we also need to look at young children with traumatic brain injury. So when they are infants, they may have had a traumatic brain injury or a brain injury, and then they go to school. And so schools become our largest provider of services to students with brain injuries. And so we do have the Office of it's called various programs in Native communities. It can be called the Office of Special Education, or it can be Exceptional Student Services, but these are services provided to children and young adults and youths who are in school who need accommodations because of various disabilities. So schools tend to provide those services because that's where children are at. And for brain injuries, again, it's the same thing. If a child suffers a brain injury, whether being in the womb, being born with a brain injury, or developing during birth, or having a fall or an accident when they're younger and they go to school, they have services at schools available for them. Because the consequences of having a brain injury is that there might be difficulties in learning and behavior, and so services are required for students. In addition, it's also research has indicated that boys tend to have more traumatic brain injuries than girls. Again, some of the research looks at due to the activities that boys do, whether they're adventurous and play out, or take many more risks and challenges, or that they are involved in sports such as football and basketball, where they can be hit and sustain a brain injury. Okay. So with the next slide, we have some of the causes of brain injury by age. So as infants, it can be, developmental challenges in the womb while being birthed. So again, congenital in the womb, or perinatal while they're being born, but also can be due to abuse and neglect. Toddlers, it can be abuse, falls as well. Again, we're looking at the shaken baby syndrome, where I talked about earlier. In elementary school, children can have falls, and then pedestrian motor vehicle accidents, where they can be hit by vehicles, or they can have falls on playground equipment in the schools, where they can suffer a traumatic brain injury. When they are in elementary and middle school, it can be pedestrian bicycle accidents, meaning that they are hit by a car while riding their bike or their scooter, or nowadays involved in an accident with an all-terrain vehicle. And in sports, again, football, basketball, where they can be hit by someone and suffer a brain injury. And in high school, it is usually motor vehicle accidents because as young drivers, they may not know the rules or may take risks, or they're on the roads at different hours where they're at high risk of being in a motor vehicle crash, or because, as I said earlier, the conditions of the rural communities where we live, which may not be as safe. Now, for older adults, specifically among American Indians, there are visits to hospitals more often for people 75 years and older for traumatic brain injuries, and it is because of fall-related traumatic brain injuries. As we get older, we lose coordination due to loss of muscles, maybe developing of Alzheimer's and dementia, which can also impact our ability for balance, but also impact our ability to remember things or have confusion, and that would put us at risk for falling down. So again, our rates are about 1.4 times higher than among white people. And here in the Southwest, in Northern Plains, we have the highest rate of fall-related deaths for American Indians. And again, some of these deaths can be attributed to deaths of folks. So when I was younger, we took care of our elder relatives. And one of the challenge was that I, as a Navajo person growing up in a rural community on the Navajo reservation, our elders lived by themselves and many times did their activities to get water, look after their livestock, work around their property, and they did it alone without help. And so many times they would have falls, and if there's no one to help them, they just pick themselves up. But when we see that they are having more challenges, then we start thinking about making sure that there's other people around to help them with their activities, but also to remove some of the barriers to prevent those falls. Say, for instance, making sure that there are no rugs on the floor, because rugs are one of the #1 causes for falls among elderly people, because when they lose their ability to lift up their legs when they're walking, or they have a shuffling gait, a rug can get caught in their legs and they can fall down. And as they get older, our bones also become weaker. And so falls tend to also increase the risk of breaking bones for elderly people. And the number one risk is for hip fractures, which prevents, again, a person from walking even further, and they have to be hospitalized.
I have a question about elderly.
Yes.
In some cases, does abuse and neglect contribute to the TBI statistics?
Yes, in some cases. Again, when researchers or people looking at data, they have to be able to find information, whether from hospitals or police records, to say that was the cause for the traumatic brain injury. So remember when I said that doctors, when they see patients, they have to document and ask questions of what happened to the person and be able to list what kind of brain injury it is. So people look at the data, the reports, the medical records, and then they can actually say that violence to an elder person causes traumatic brain injury. So right now, there's not much information to say that it does, but we know it does in tribal communities. We've heard through tribal forums, through our Indian agency programs, through our tribal fall prevention and elder abuse programs, that they have seen these cases, but again, it has to be documented and validated in order for it to be part of a statistic. And so hopefully we'll be able to get those numbers in the future from those that want to be able to pursue this. But yes, we can say that, elder abuse can also contribute to traumatic brain injuries. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, another topic is veterans. So more than 450,000 US service members were diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury between 2000 and 2021. So again, what we've seen historically, researchers have seen that those who go are in the military and actually see active combat, participate in conflicts in wars such as World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War, and then those conflicts that are not considered wars, but if they're deployed to like Iran, Iraq, or other places where they're at risk. Service members do get traumatic brain injuries due to assaults, active hand-to-hand combat, but also from concussive injuries, such as being near places where bombs, grenades, incendiary devices, IEDs explode near them, and the concussion itself causes that same process of having your head go back and forth, or having your head go back and hit the back of your head and causing injury. So, so those are some of the causes attributed to military conflicts. But then they also see that a lot of veterans are also suffer from traumatic brain injury from motor vehicle crashes. And those who have traumatic brain injuries many times will have ongoing symptoms. They'll have like headaches, blurry vision. They may experience other health conditions along with a traumatic brain injury, such as what is called post-traumatic stress disorder, due to seeing conflict, due to seeing war. They may have some nightmares and reactions to being in a war situation, and may develop depression, may drink more often to try to combat that. And so then on top of that, they have a traumatic brain injury. So they may have all those multiple things happening at once. They may have difficulty accessing health care, especially mental health services for veterans in general, because we do have Veterans Administration hospitals located here in Arizona. We have one in northern Arizona up near Prescott, one in the Phoenix area, and then one here in southern Arizona. But for those in the rural communities, they may have a hard time actually going to the Veterans Administration for services because those services are on campus. They're not out in the community. And so that hinders people from accessing services. And tribal programs have actually started developing programs in tribal communities to address those. And because of all the challenges that veterans face with a traumatic brain injury, with post-traumatic stress, or with depression, and using substance abuses to help to medicate that, they may think about or plan a suicide attempt. And many times those can be by firearms. So then they might have, that's also a big concern. So this is very challenging. My father served in the Korean War, and he did have post-traumatic stress syndrome, but we didn't know what it was because he never went to the Veterans Administration to receive any services. but we knew he had depression. We knew he had anxiety. He had nightmares. He couldn't sleep. And as he got older, we noticed that he started getting dementia very early on. And he would talk about being in foxholes, about being places where bombs were being blown off and falling back on the ground and coming up with headaches and ringing his ears and seeing stars. And so we know he suffered from a traumatic brain injury and he had PTSD, but he never received services. And unfortunately, he passed in 2007 at the age of 75, and he really never addressed that. But he had challenges most of his life because of that, and we tried providing services, and it is a challenge with veterans. Okay. So I did mention some efforts that tribes are doing, fall prevention efforts through the Indian Health Service, making sure that homes of elder folks have ramps, have walk-in showers, that people in the families that take care of the elders know how to prevent falls, removing those rugs, making sure things are within safe difference, helping their elder family member get up, or using assistive devices such as walkers or wheelchairs. In addition, other tribal communities have started thinking about how to address motor vehicle crashes. And so a lot of our communities have started enforcing primary seatbelt laws, enforcing or reducing the amount of alcohol that people have in their system to be charged for driving under the influence. There's high visibility efforts such as sobriety checkpoints, increased police enforcement, along with mass media campaigns. And so some of those have been really effective in reducing motor vehicle crashes. And those are really due to addressing, making sure people have seatbelts and making sure people do not drink and drive. But again, we still need efforts in order to fix our roads and making sure our roads are safe. That's one thing that that state and federal partners and programs need to focus on. Okay. So when we talk about traumatic brain injury, many times there is mild traumatic brain injury, which people will call concussion. And so traumatic brain injury, the mild version of a concussion, is sometimes also known as, as concussion, also known as mild head injury, minimal head injury, benign head injury, trivial head injury. Some will say it's low risk. Many times medical professionals will say grade 1, class 1. People will call, I just dinged my head, or my bell was rung, or public health professionals will call it an acquired brain injury. And so that is one of the challenges in traumatic brain injuries or brain injuries, is that a lot of different people and professions call it various terms. And so many times we're not sure what exactly people are talking about. So it's important to know that people call it various terms. Okay. So some of the consequences of even a mild traumatic brain injury. When a person gets up after being suffering a traumatic brain injury and they walk it off and are told, dust yourself off, you're fine. The sports person playing sports gets hit and they get up, I'm fine. They walk away. But later on, some of the challenges may be intracranial hemorrhages, meaning that there was damage within the brain to where now you're bleeding in the brain. and it's causing reducing the amount of oxygen that can get in there, but also squeezing your head too much. Because remember, your brain has the skull and it has the brain inside. There's not much room in there. So there can be swelling due to a lot of blood leaking out. It can also be the second impact syndrome, meaning that you can have a repeated injury and suffering a brain injury soon after another one may continue that swelling even more. So usually it's for a lot of sports athletes. Again, when the person in basketball or football goes out again and maybe hit again, that could be the second impact syndrome. And sometimes there are, you can see some immediate effects of a mild traumatic brain injury. You know, their sleeping patterns are changed, which is somatic. Cognitive, meaning that the way they think has been changed many times. They might be forgetful or all of a sudden start having a glaze in their eyes because they're trying to figure out what exactly it is I'm thinking of or struggling to say things. There might have emotional and behavioral challenges. They might be quick to anger, might get upset fast, might start having depressive symptoms. And so it's because of the damage in the brain to the tissue, to the nerves in there, to the blood vessels. And the brain, you know, covers all the functions of our body that we're seeing these changes. But some of the long-term effects are, again, these symptoms don't go away. So after a month or 2 months, you still have these symptoms. And these are called post-concussive symptoms, meaning it's long-term. And so because you have these symptoms, you can also re-injure yourself because your balance may be off, your attention may be a little altered, you may be having headaches and pain that you think, you know, you're using medication or using medication inappropriately, pain medication, or using other substances to help you with that. Either it's medical or marijuana or other type of substances, then you increase your risk to re-injure yourself. And you can actually have, because of these symptoms are long term, you can have partial or even total disability. So you're not able to function as you used to. So again, it can be the headaches, the dizziness, vertigo, meaning that you have a balance issue, you have ringing in your ears, nausea and vomiting, tired all the time, you're not sleeping, again, the ringing in the ear, you're not coordinated, your balance is off, your vision is impacted, you are sensitive to light and noise, and many times your sense of smell and how you taste things may be different. So it's really, you know, these are some of the symptoms that can result, and these are really symptoms to look out for. Okay. Those are the physical symptoms. Now the cognitive symptoms, meaning how we think. Short-term memory impairment, meaning that someone might say things to you you don't remember, but you remember things that happened a long time ago. Your attention, you no longer have that attention to things. You might be able, you might have a challenge in processing things, organizing things, problem solving, and even starting something. So a hesitancy to do that because many times you're confused. And of course, you can develop depression, anxiety, impatience, all those. So traumatic brain injury, even a mild one, can impact you. So it's really important that folks, when they do have a head injury, even though it might be mild, to follow the concussive protocol, which means resting your brain for 24 hours, not doing that much, making sure that you see the doctor, making sure that you have long-term follow-up, because a lot of these symptoms can come on later on. Okay. And living with mild, moderate, or severe brain injury, it's almost like this picture we have here of an iceberg, where what you see is just the top 10% of the iceberg. You look fine, everybody sees you're fine, you're functioning well, but what they don't see is when you go home or after work or other times when no one is looking, you have the fatigue, you have the visual problems, memory problems, all these things. And so it's really important to get assistance as soon as possible and to continue to get assistance. So again, we're running out of time, but the next portion of the slides are basically just talking about rehabilitation. I'm not going to go through that because that is a longer conversation of where people can get services to help when they do have a traumatic brain injury, but they will be in your slides and also in the it'll be in the slides if you ask for the slides. Again, we just went through this about cognitive impairments, some of the social impairments we talked about. Long-term, again, some of these things can be long-term to where a person has a disability. And again, what changes with traumatic brain injury is that it impacts your activities of daily living. It impacts your ability to work, to pursue any kind of activities you do for fun. It may impact your relationships because your partner, your family member may have to take care of you or have to address the symptoms. And as a parent, if your child suffers from a brain injury, then you have to think about long-term consequences. Or if you as a parent receive a traumatic brain injury, it can impact the relationship you have with your child and friendships as well. So we did talk about some of our psychological reactions with family. So over 90% of people return home. So again, when they do return home after a traumatic brain injury, it may impact their job. There might be medical expenses, especially if they've had to stay in the hospital. If there's rehabilitation that needs to be physical rehabilitation or how to live, to do things, whether your insurance, well, you have insurance, will that cover it? Will Indian Health Service cover some of these services? If you're referred out, because remember, Indian Health Service only provides primary care, and then they send you out to services. So unless you have insurance, access, Medicaid, Medicare, or direct service, you may have challenges in paying for those services. And many times there's conflict within families regarding a person who returns home with a traumatic brain injury. And the family members may have to take on new roles depending upon the extent of the traumatic brain injury, whether it's mild or severe, if it causes disabilities, who's going to be the caretaker. And many times as caretakers or a person with a disability who is homebound, they can become socially isolated, especially in rural communities where there are no services. How do we get to these services that are many times located in border or urban areas? And of course, it impacts the way we think and feel. And many times there's grief, depression, or even post-traumatic stress from the event that caused our traumatic brain injury. So it requires a lot of people coordinating services from hospitals, rehabilitation, vocational rehabilitation, case management, all these other services. So it requires someone to help the person if they have a severe traumatic brain injury and is disabled. So usually a caregiver or family member has to do all these on behalf of the person. But also thinking about traditional healing, medicines, foods, and cultural activities that the person needs to take advantage of and how that will be paid for. So So it requires a lot of coordination. There are some resources. There's the North Dakota Brain Injury Network, which has resources. The Intertribal Council of Arizona did a report on traumatic brain injuries. You can access it from their website. And CDC has a nice PDF file on understanding the disparities in traumatic brain injury. And this is a list of all the resources. Again, those will be sent to you. So I will stop sharing my slides and we have time for questions. And thank you very much, Jennifer, and all you folks who are doing American Sign Language, because I tried speaking as slowly as possible. So do we have any questions? You can place it in the chat or you can raise your hand, unmute yourself. Okay, is it Killian?
Yes. I didn't really have a question, but I just wanted to share, like, back in 2013, Hopi High lost one of the football players. They were playing down in Phoenix and he got hit pretty hard.
Mhm.
The coach said that he fell and then he jumped right back up, so they didn't think anything of it. And it turns out he had a blood clot and he passed away at St. Joseph from a brain injury as well. So they did a lot to keep that from happening again. They really ramped up on the cushioning and the helmets and the padding or whatever they use. But I remember that hit the community pretty hard. He was a well-known kid, and I don't know which one of the news stations it was that was allowed to come onto the land to report it, but it was a big thing that had happened. But I wanted to share that because it was a bad brain injury that he suffered, and ended up taking his life. And this kid was 16 when he passed on.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Yes, that is the stories we hear in our communities. You know, every person is valued and valuable. And many times it takes an incident such as that to create policies and trainings and education for folks to ensure that people who suffer these blows are mandated to sit out and be observed and not go back in, because you know they can, as I said, they can re-injure themselves and cause additional damage. And so I'm sorry for your community to have to go through that, and thank you very much for sharing. Vanessa, do you have a question?
Hi there. Thank you for your presentation. It's very, very informal. Thank you. My daughter suffered a brain injury. She was in a car accident back in December, and it was caused by cardiac arrest. And she was without oxygen for a certain amount of time, which caused seizures. But her brain injury was pretty traumatic. And she's home now, but she still suffers from lack of control of her muscles. So her arms and her legs kind of move, and her facial muscles move a little bit still. We're still waiting for physical therapy. It's just taking forever. We're on the waiting list. But I'm wondering, do you know if those kinds of symptoms or things that happen, will that go away in time, or is this a long-term thing? Do you know?
So again, I am not a medical expert or a medical doctor, so I cannot give medical advice. But according to the research, it really depends upon the type of treatment your daughter is getting and your involvement with their treatment team to be able to see what's available for them. And so I know you also wrote in the chat about this, that, you know, that the uncontrollable muscle movements and the arms and legs. So I can't really say if it will go away because I don't know I'm not a doctor, so I can't really answer that. But again, when we look at the brain, so the brain controls everything. So when there's a traumatic brain injury and lack of oxygen is one of those, that it starves certain parts of the brain, so it may not function as well. So the point of rehabilitation is to be able to get those muscles moving again, to try to be able to function. But many times, because of the traumatic brain injury, if certain parts of the brain um, are impacted and the brain cells die, many times it's hard to regenerate and it's that part of the brain. That's all I know. That's scientific information about how the brain works. So again, the important thing is to work with your medical provider and ask those questions. So as a mother myself who's had a child who's had heart challenges, I have actively researched literature and talked to other people like yourself, attending webinars and asking questions, trying to figure out what would be the best options for my child and seeing if there's any new treatments, new ways of doing things to help. And so I applaud your effort in doing that. And so I hope you're able to find people that help you with can answer those questions. Again, it's a medical treatment question. So I do apologize. I'm unable to provide you any answer
No, thank
for
you
that.
very much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Any more questions? Killian, did you have another one?
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any data to that might prove if pandas contributes to TBI? 'Cause I know pandas really takes a toll on the brain of a child. I was
Mm.
wondering if there's any data that will indicate that it does contribute to the TBI.
Again, there has been so again, pandas is an autoimmune disease, and it does not really destroy healthy brain tissue. But again, there might be something in there that can cause abnormal brain signaling. Again, I'm not an expert, but I can certainly find information that can help you in terms of options because there's like the pandas network, which you can find online that looks at research and treatment options. And usually they're very good at providing information regarding what's available out there. So I will. Do you know of the organization, the Pandas Network?
No, I've been just off and on studying it because I know it starts with the streptococcal strain, one of the
Hmm.
streptococcal strains, but it had me interested. I was trying to figure out like how we avoid it because I know how they get it. So I was just trying to I was look just kind of like a hobby study kind of thing that I'm doing on that. But I'll check out the network for sure and get
Okay.
some information. Thank you.
So I did put a link in the chat regarding the Panda Network and what they say about the linkage to inflammation, and I think they did address some of the linkages to brain health. So you can take a look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, thank you very much for sharing your lunchtime with me